Hello, everyone, and welcome to Blogging in Theology. And today I'm delighted to welcome back Dr. Jaan Islam. You're most welcome, sir. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. Thanks for having me, Paul.
It's great to have you back, sir. For those who don't know, Dr. Jaan is an assistant professor of political theory at Boğaziçi University in Turkey. Forgive me if my pronunciation's not right there. On a recent thread on X/Twitter, you say some really hard-hitting things in 8 tweets, and I think it would be immensely beneficial to go through them. And the title of this podcast is provisionally is "How to Be an Academic While Muslim." This is a really important subject, actually. So I'm just going to put up the tweets and share the screen so we can just talk about them. Actually, go through them one by one. Hope everyone can see those. So, how to be an academic while Muslim, particularly I think in the social sciences and humanities by Jaan Islam. I'll just read it out. Muslim grad and PhD students I've met often feel uncertain and directionless. We try to make sense of the world through multiple worldviews, then try to make sense of how Islam fits among them, all while experiencing relentless publish or perish pressure to land a job and build a career. Here are a few reflections I hope may help those walking a similar path. So why do you feel the need to write these tweets? What's the burden of your mind on this issue?
Thank you so much for asking this, Paul. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. The main rationale behind my writing this tweet, and I didn't think that it was going to blow up, to be honest, but I just felt, I want to be genuine and give some sincere advice to those who sort of treaded a similar path that I was on, in terms of living especially as a minority in the Muslim world, or as a Muslim in an academic world, and trying to navigate let's say, your identity as a Muslim on the one hand, and someone who must fear Allah on the one hand, and someone who's just trying to excel in their academic career and find out the truth and participate in conferences on the other. And people don't really think that there's going to be a contradiction here, but I felt for myself that there were many internal contradictions, difficulties in expressing myself that I sort of accumulated over the years. And I wanted to sort of reach out to all of my fellow graduate, postgraduate students and say that you're not alone. And here's the way that you can be Muslim academic while Muslim. Or yeah. I could have also framed the tweet, how to remain Muslim while academic. Yes. I think both are important.
Yes, absolutely. Cool. Okay, so let's have a look at the first one. Perhaps I'll just read them out, and then we can discuss them, and you can give us more information and background and so on. So you say, number one, the harsh reality is, if you're visibly Muslim or non-white, you'll automatically be 10 steps behind. You need to publish twice as much, network twice as hard, and pass through social vetting obstacles that your colleagues didn't even know existed. This reality will help build your ihsan, excellence. It's an Arabic word in Islam. Remember the hadith. Allah has prescribed ihsan in everything. Publish early, starting from your MA thesis. Attend conferences and build connections with senior academics. Your work will pay off. I mean, I was struck by this, really, when you said this. If you're visibly Muslim or non-white, you have a much harder time, and that you're going to pass through obstacles that presumably your non-Muslim or white colleagues didn't even know existed. What's going on there?
Paul, I think we've had lots of discussions and debates about, critical race theory and, white privilege and all that. And I don't want to get into that discussion, but what I will say is, I think the fundamental reality is, when you are speaking in any society with certain norms and a language and values and a way of talking, a way of looking at someone in the eye and that kind of thing, if you are not a so-called predominant or understood to be one of the, a normative member of that society, and that can be because English is your second language, it could be because you're visibly Muslim, it could be any other reason, it could be because you're, let's say, dark-skinned or whatever. And the reality is, people like myself, academics will experience not just overt or even subtle racism, but just a constant attempt. And there's one very nice sheikh who put it in a nice way, Dr. Shadi al-Masri, who himself is an academic. He said that academia is nifaq. And what my interpretation of what he's saying is you have to sort of put a mask on, so to speak, that you feel that you might be characterized or mischaracterized because of your faith or because of your visual whatever, and as a result you adjust your behavior and your character to compensate for it. Yeah. And what happens in that case, Paul, is you have people like, let's say muhajjibat, women who, let's say, wear hijab, or men who have beards or who have a madrasa background, and they will give that, let's say, presentation. This is something I've seen, people have told me this, one-on-one and in groups, that, when I talk, I feel like I'm not able to, I feel like I'm not being taken seriously because I'm talking about Islam as a Muslim, and therefore my audience isn't going to treat me as a real authority on the subject. And therefore what happens, Brother Paul, is that these people then readjust their behavior to compensate for the assumed lack of let's say authoritative speech. And what that does is it creates a lack of confidence. And when you give any speech or class with a lack of confidence, then that's going to be sensed by the people who are evaluating your job interview. In a job interview setting, they're going to say, oh, this person wasn't that confident, whereas it has nothing to do with confidence or their knowledge of the subject. They know the subject very well, but they're just trying to adjust and they create that thing. It's an easy example, something very simple as when, I don't know, you're in an interview or you're in a class setting, someone says, okay, this person is Muslim, so I'm not going to say Merry Christmas, I'm going to say Happy Holidays. But you know that in the Sharia, that's not really allowed either to say Happy Holidays, to acknowledge, right? Whether it's Hanukkah or it's Christmas or whatever. So you just sort of shift in your seat and look down at your shoes or whatever. Again, these are the kinds of things that we're talking about. And it's not just one or two, but these are hundreds that sort of come together over time and create difficulty in expressing once.
And also, if I may just jump in, one of the things I've had to deal with, so I'm a white guy who does deal with some of these issues as well, is when someone knows I'm Muslim, I'm introduced to someone who's a non-Muslim, and she extends her hand to shake hands with me. So if she's a Muslim woman, then I'm usually confident she's not going to extend her hand and shake my hand. But if it's a non-Muslim woman, I tell you on occasions, I've just given in and shaken their hand because the social pressure. It's just easy just to get it over with, because if I don't shake their hand, I have to explain, and there are all sorts of misunderstandings that are kind of built in on that very level. So sometimes I'm brave and sometimes I'm not. But it is difficult. I mean, this is very small compared to what you're talking about. But yeah.
I'll tell you, Paul, it goes to such an extent where, I know professors, these are full-fledged professors in the world's best universities, who are Muslim, but, they're white. So you wouldn't assume that they're Muslim, with a white name, maybe even a Jewish name or something. And you wouldn't assume that person's Muslim because you wouldn't assume it. He's not required to announce it to everybody. He's not required to pray in front of everyone. So he'll just hide it. He'll be so-called submarine, as they say.
Submarine,
But what that does is, again, it builds up that culture where, if people are like that, then as a visible Muslim, what do you do? Because you can't do that. And is that what we should be doing as Muslim? That's another question. I understand if there's no, Sharia obligation to sort of put your identity in people's faces or whatever, or to lend, credence to misunderstandings. I understand that's not a part of prophetic etiquette. However, if you're an academic and you are studying something that's normatively important in the world, and you're afraid of speaking the truth because you're afraid that people are going to judge you because of it, or you're afraid that people aren't going to take you seriously, then we have to remember what in the Quran, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about وَلَا يَخَافُونَ لَوْمَةَ لَائِمٍ, they don't fear regarding the pious believers, that they do jihad fi sabilillah, yujahiduna fi sabilillah, وَلَا يَخَافُونَ لَوْمَةَ لَائِمٍ, and they do not fear the blame of the blamers. And that's the reason that jihad in speech, and we know that jihad means struggle, and it has many different types, including protecting the oppressed, including stopping things with your hand, including speaking the truth. And that's why I think the niyyah part, which is what I built on later, is absolutely essential for any academic, regardless of you or your identity or where you're from. This is between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? Are you doing this to please Allah, or are you doing it just as a career where you can pay the bills?
I think I'm glad you mentioned that, if you're visibly Muslim or non-white, because it's something that I didn't know, perhaps predictably, for a long time, that is how we are treated differently just based on our ethnicity or on our race, even in modern, progressive, liberal democracies, which loudly proclaim their color blindness or their equality or whatever. But it is a reality, white privilege, I mean. It's definitely a reality. And I know that not because I read a good book by a PC author, but because I've seen it over and over and over again in my life, in experience that I've had when I've been traveling, for example, with non-white, Muslim friends who are not white, how differently we're treated. Always. I mean, it's just routine, and you've got to see it. You've got to have like this kind of almost a scientific experiment to actually observe it happening. You've got your white guy, your non-white, and see what happens. And it's a reality, actually. And so I'm the firm acknowledger of the reality of white privilege. But a long time I wasn't. And I think most white people in the UK, at least, probably, I think it's just a woke fiction, basically. It's an urban myth, promoted by these lefties, and so the Daily Mail will go after them, the Telegraph will go on. But it's true, it's reality. I mean, no one convinced me otherwise, because I've seen it repeatedly in my experience.
Absolutely. I think that's sort of the reality, and I guess we have to we can work to change that reality, but at the same time we have to just because the standards are, let's say, stacked, the cards are stacked against us, doesn't mean we shouldn't do our best to make our case. And I think this is why I mentioned ihsan, because ihsan, as the Prophet ﷺ said, that is prescribed in everything. If you consider academia as a means to gain closeness to Allah, whether that's in the social sciences or in the humanities or in natural sciences, I think most Muslims usually prefer natural sciences in the Muslim countries. But it builds, I guess, a culture where, I might not be given this job, I might not get the promotion that I deserve, but I'm still going to do the best, because that's what it means to be a Muslim.
Right. Okay. Let's look at the second tweet. I'll just read that out. Apply widely, prepare for rejection. After my PhD, you write, I applied to 40 plus academic posts, got 3 interviews, and only 1 offer, which ironically was from Oxford University. So, you got the okay, you may have had some hardship there, but at least you got one of the best universities in the world. Remember that your risk is written. This is kind of your resources, your income, your livelihood, I guess. That's what it means. Rejection doesn't reflect your worth or effort. I was offered 1 out of 40 plus jobs, despite having published 5 peer-reviewed articles, plus 2 top field journals, 2 academic monographs in the year I completed my PhD. Many successful friends of mine have similar stories. Gosh, it sounds like an extraordinarily challenging thing to have to go through, I must say.
I guess the point of that tweet, Brother Paul, was to say that there are 2 things involved, I think, in at least my own personal difficulty in landing a job, especially in the beginning. One of them is the basic reality of the job market in social sciences and humanities, which is just, it's a reality. 9 out of 10 aren't going to land a permanent post in the end of the day. But beyond that, people who, let's say you're qualified, and I do think I was qualified for a job, whether it's at Oxford or anywhere else. I have friends who not only have 5, I have friends with 100, some with 150 publications. These
Wow.
guys are incredible people. And these are friends of mine. But because, let's say, in my case, I was involved in da'wah, I was involved in some activism, not necessarily like protest type activism, but more like, giving da'wah in masajid. And it was fully public. You could search my name and, find it.
Yeah.
And the reality is people look at that. So beyond racism, I want to move that away from, I don't want to claim that all of this is related to race, because I think that a good part of it is related to your deen. and deen as a way of life. If you have a way of life that is pleasing to the status quo, then you're going to be tolerated and given lots of job opportunities. Whereas if you don't, then you're not going to. And so one example is, I applied to many jobs, and most of those jobs were funded. Many of them were just normal local university positions, but many were funded by the Saudis or the Emiratis. Wow. And they were interested in, let's say, discourse between religions, in normalizing the legitimacy of all Abrahamic faiths. They were interested in people who would, let's say, normalize or justify, the relationship, Arab countries' relationship with Israel. They don't want someone to go in and say, talk about how we can have a truly free Palestine and why the Arab countries are not preventing a genocide happening before their eyes. No one wants an academic. You can be the same academic, you can have, your Western credentials, you can have publications, but that's not what the post is for. The post is to normalize it. And this is one of the biggest traps, Brother Paul, which is because Muslims realize that either I have to change my subject of study to something that's more appealing, or I will, my chance of getting a job is low. And that's why I talked about the risk part. Because in my case, from a purely academic perspective, I do think that I deserve that job. But from an, let's say, activism perspective or an Islamic perspective, or let's say an ideological perspective, I'm the last person in the world who should have gotten that job. I don't believe that's right. But I know people and I have friends who are in, let's say, in top universities in the UK. I don't want to name them, but they were explicitly told, again, I don't think this is to do with race. They were explicitly told that you're not going to get a job here or anywhere in the UK because you're involved in Palestine activism. And they said that not out of a bad intention, not out of a desire to attack them, just to tell them that this is the reality of what happens. People look you up. People, this unspoken censorship exists. But at the same time, if you were to think, this is the last point I want to make, if you start to think because of this, that by changing my activism or not speaking the truth or not doing the right thing, not doing something pleasing to Allah, not being engaged in da'wah, I'm going to increase my chance of being accepted by academia, that's the biggest mistake you'll make in your life. Because then you forgot when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, when the Prophet said, innamal a'malu binniyat, actions are by intentions. Right. You can't, your action with a good intention cannot be directly in contradiction to what Allah is telling you to do. And in contrast, if you speak the truth and you do the right thing, remember the risk is from Allah, the position is from Allah. People, I think, often forget that. You have examples of Muslims who are shattering and breaking glass ceilings, right? Like your Hamza Yusuf, Prime Minister of Scotland, and this is a person who, in order to be elected, had to legitimize and say that I don't believe LGBT is a sin. He had to compromise on the most fundamental aspect of his deen because he was Muslim. His non-Muslim opponent. Sorry. Yeah.
No, sorry, interrupting you, but I'm just saying, since he's left office, Hamza Yusuf, this is not Hamza Yusuf in California. This is a different person entirely.
Yes, Prime Minister of Scotland.
Yes, Sheikh Hamza Yusuf is not the Prime Minister of Scotland. This is a different Hamza Yusuf. Now, since he's left office, I've noticed he's very outspoken on Palestine. He's suddenly become a Muslim again. He's like any other guy, just speaking out on these issues. So you're absolutely right. When he was in office, he became a different creature, a very politically correct, acceptable, mainstream, progressive, liberal. All the things. Think, where are your principles? Where are your values? I mean, okay, as a politician, what do you expect? Nevertheless, I still felt it was it was very scandal. It was a great scandal, actually.
Absolutely, and I think that
Sorry, you were saying.
Your Zahran Mamdani is another example. Someone who's very outspoken about Palestine and rights of Muslims around the world. And all of a sudden, he meets with Bernie Sanders and he starts to change. He starts talking about freeing hostages. He starts talking about two-state solutions, and all of this. And you say, wait a second, what happened? What happened was he began to be a serious candidate, and the power structures around him. We think of social, let's say, structure, let's say getting hired for a job or getting elected or something like that. We think of it just as a set of rules and procedures, but that's not how it works, right? It works with something like campaign funds. In the case of politics, if you don't have the funds, then you can't run a campaign and you can't get elected. In the academic example, if you know somebody who's going to vouch for you from within the department that's hiring, then there's a higher chance you're going to get that job. But if you are outspoken or you speak the truth, or let's say your work does not align with the interests of the state or the foreign policy of the state that you're in, then you're just naturally going to be filtered out, especially because the academic job market is so saturated. They can afford to, eliminate anyone they want, even if they're qualified.
Gosh,
it's very sad.
Shocking. Okay, let's go on to the next one, which is number 3. So rectify your intention. You've already mentioned this. Academia is changing fast. Unis have cut budgets and the state is cracking down on Islamic speech and action. Yet outside the university, Muslim NGOs, businesses and grassroots movements, spaces are emerging to create societal change. Wherever you end up, your academic background will enrich the quality, impact and moral compass of Islamic action and will strengthen the plight of the Ummah. Wow. Could you unpack that for us?
It's the intention, as I said, go back to the Prophet ﷺ's. This is the very first hadith number 1 of Sahih al-Bukhari, and he deliberately chose this hadith to be number 1, which is narrated by Umar ibn al-Khattab, who said that the Prophet ﷺ said that actions are by intentions, and every individual shall have or earn according to that which they intended. We often think that me being genuine means I believe in Allah, I'm doing it for Allah's sake, and then you do whatever you want to do. I don't think that's how intention informs action. I think that intention informs action in a much more profound way. And to do that, I'll give you a very simple example of medical research. And I think it's something it's something that's real, and it happens in real life. We can relate to it. Let's say that you were again, whoever's watching, let's say you were a famous medical researcher, a doctor, and you're looking or trying to find a cure to a disease. Mm-hmm. If your intention is to please Allah, then you would find the cure to the disease and you would make it public, and you would not cover up the results of the cure that you found in order to make money or for any other purpose, because you're doing that with the basis of whoever saves a life, it is as if he saved all of humanity, as Allah says in Surah Al-Ma'idah. Mm-hmm. Whereas in the modern capitalist system, again, and many Muslims are a part of this, big pharma and industrial complex. Again, I'm not blaming them. This is how the system works. What the system will do is say, we're going to put in millions of dollars into finding a treatment to a disease. Yeah. This is something that actually happens. I have cousins who work in Pfizer. I know this is something that people often talk about, sometimes even in public. They'll say that we put so much investment into finding a cure. If we find a cure that actually works, but it's not profitable, it can't be marketed or it can't be patented, then we'll scrap the whole project and start from again, from scratch. And that shows you it's the same knowledge, same technical expertise, same laboratory, right? Yeah. Same, cells and tests, but different results based on your intention. So that would be my summary, to say that, when your, I guess this sort of goes into the fourth tweet, but when the world and the systems of the world are pushing you towards doing things in a certain way, it's always important to be mindful and readjust your attention. Pray that tahajjud, make dua to Allah, ask for tawfiq to apply your knowledge in reality, whether that's social sciences or natural sciences.
Yeah, great stuff. Now, the fourth tweet is very powerful. Be realistic about the West, you write. The West is becoming less hospitable for Muslims, and day by day, academia is being exposed as the extension of state power, whether it's LGBTQ plus ideology enforced in schools and campuses, Palestinian and Umatic causes branded as extremism and referred to prevent, or the threat of your children being taken away. Don't be deluded by the credentials of a Western-sounding university if it comes at the cost of your values. More academics are moving east and are realizing their impact is far more valuable by their societies, i.e. reverse brain drain. Gosh, there's a lot there.
I guess what I'm trying to say in a summary is the notion that in the West, in fact, really everywhere in the world, academia is an intellectual, serves as the intellectual backbone of state power.
Yeah.
State needs to think. Everyone needs a brain. The brain of the state is academia, or it historically was academia. That doesn't mean every single academic does this deliberately, but that's what the system is meant to do. Orientalism, if you're in Islamic studies, Orientalism was used to understand Muslim societies, to justify colonial rule, and to find the best way of maintaining foreign occupation. It was related to a real material, cause. Similarly, in political science, which is my field, this colonial occupation has evolved to a question using different words, same question using different words, which is how do I bring peace and democracy to the world, which in reality means foreign occupation, genocide, securitizing Muslim identity by labeling, entire countries, an entire population of Gaza as terrorists. This deliberate securitization is part of what you call, the ideology of the state to justify what it's doing, because no human being would justify that, right? Mm-hmm. And it's important to be aware of it. It doesn't mean every academic who's going to be, in a government position or whatever will necessarily believe in this or promote this, but it's very easy to promote it, especially when academia naturally, in terms of success criteria, publications and funding and getting invited to fancy conferences and all of that, it sort of, there's a negative filtration system where the more you compromise or the more you support or implicitly recreate the categories of that state ideology, then the higher position you're going to get.
Okay. Because I just ask about, you say more academics are moving east. This reverse brain drain effect. Where are academics going to? Can you name names? I mean, not the academics, but where are people going?
I think, a lot of, especially Muslim academics, and that's, we're talking about for the most part, if they're second or third generation immigrants like myself, they are re-establishing ties with the countries their grandparents and great-grandparents came from. They are strengthening ties by going to conferences and meeting academics from institutions in the Muslim world. There are some are even financially, there are incentives, let's say in the Gulf states, which in addition to being a Muslim country provide funding, better than what you would get better support than what you would get in let's say in Europe. And slowly that shift is, I think that shift is underway. In the next 10, 15 years or so, we're going to see it materialize. And, we're seeing in the university rankings, the rise of, non-Western institutions. Yes. And part of this is due to the state crackdown. And people think I'm exaggerating. What are you talking about? State crackdown on academics. But this is a real thing. And
in America, look what happened in America, the Trump administration cracking down on Ivy League, seemingly independent, venerable, ancient.
Absolutely.
Yale, Harvard.
Even on individual people, Paul. You remember Jonathan Brown. This guy is just professor in university, and he makes one tweet, and you have Congress people questioning the president of the university or whatever, university administrators over why you let this guy make one tweet. That's the level of censorship that we live under.
Not even McCarthyism. McCarthyism is mild compared to this. This is like, a single statement, and suddenly your whole, it's absolutely awful. It's a new era of kind of neo-McCarthyism.
And Brother Paul, if I could add this, especially in the UK, I think it's reached a boiling point where you have people, the Palestine Action arrests and whatnot. Prevent has turned into I mean, it was really a joke for a long time, but it's turned into this unserious but at the same time frightening system of political crackdown. The state is using things like Schedule 7. I have lots of friends I even have colleagues whose offices were raided by counterterrorism police because they were Muslims who were studying terrorism studies, or they were studying, let's say, Middle Eastern politics. Of course, if they weren't Muslim, that wouldn't have been a problem. This is something that people like me had to deal with, right? This is a real, you might say, what are you talking about raiding offices? These are things that actually happen. There was, just to give you an example, a relatable example, a few years ago, there was one kid reported to prevent. A 4-year-old kid in a daycare was reported to prevent because he drew a cucumber and he wasn't able to pronounce the word cucumber because he's a kid. And the teacher thought that he was saying time bomb because he's Muslim. It was in the news. It's unbeliable. So this is what we're dealing with. But the sad reality, I know it's a joke, like it's comedic tragedy, you know, so to speak.
Yeah.
But what it means is, you know, with decreasing tolerance of Islam due to the genocide that is ongoing in Gaza and many other reasons, Muslims are slowly going to start moving. And I think that's not only something second or third generation immigrants are doing, but just let's say it's a general Allahu Alam, but that'll be something Muslim academics from across the board are considering at the moment.
Yes, absolutely right. Absolutely, yeah. The whole question of hijra is on many people's minds in the West at the moment. Of course, that plays also into the far right, who would encourage that. You know, it's just kind of an unfortunate synergy there. So number 5, defeat imposter syndrome and understand that your values, intellect, and integrity hold the potential to change the world. Allah says about sincere believers, He loves them and they love Him, and they are fierce against the disbelievers, humble towards the believers, strive in the path of Allah, jihad, and do not fear the blame of the blamer, Quran 5:54. Not fearing blame and working tirelessly for justice and the Ummah's unification is the standard we are accountable to. This is one of my favorite themes. Understand that by empowering Muslim institutions, your Islamic action as a scholar and man of perfection, you redefine the standards of legitimacy itself. So I like the way you say there, not fearing blame and working tirelessly for justice and the Ummah's unification. I mean, this idea of the unity of the Ummah as one family, but political unity, social, economic unity is such an important subject.
You know, Paul, this is why I mentioned imposter syndrome, especially again as someone who's trying to prove themselves, even who's held to a higher standard than everyone else. That lends credence or leads to the possibility of imposter syndrome. But the sad, or let's say one of the greatest negative side effects of that imposter syndrome or lack of confidence among Muslim academics is they don't understand the value that they have in changing the world. And what they're thinking is maybe someone like this is something that I struggled with. Let's say by going to Istanbul or going to let's say Jeddah, right, or to Doha, or to to Karachi, I think that I'm reducing my academic credentials, which I needed to be taken seriously. Whereas what's actually happening in reality, Brother Paul, is by high quality people who are capable of changing the world and being part of global discussions and gaining funding and being engaged in these publications and giving da'wah to the ummah, their presence in the Muslim world will increase the institutions. It will increase the quality of institutions. It will increase the willingness of people to strengthen those institutions. It will increase the funding of those institutions. It will increase the intellectual and economic capital. It will create a reverse brain drain, which is what I mentioned, right?
Yeah.
We think that we're not able to do that as an individual, but this is how it works. It's just chain reaction. Someone needs to start to do it. And this is something I think, we're going to see more of in the future. But at the same time, we like to think that we can make the same level of change by living in the West and sort of throwing it the way that a friend of mine, Dr. Yaqub Ahmed, put it. He says, we think that by living in the West and throwing stones at the Muslim world, I'm going to create change there. That's not how it works. If you want to create change in Syria, you have to go to Damascus, live there, and struggle with the people in order to gain the legitimacy. The last point I want to remind everyone, when the Prophet ﷺ was in Mecca, when they were under the boycott and many Muslims were starving, they were tying stones to their stomachs out of hunger. And they went to the Prophet ﷺ and complained that, we're so hungry, we're tying stones to our stomachs. And the Prophet ﷺ lifted his shirt and he had 2 stones tied, right, to his torso, to show that whatever you're suffering, I'm suffering double. And that's what gave the Prophet ﷺ even more legitimacy as a leader.
Yeah.
If the Prophet ﷺ needed to suffer in order to realize the highest form of human leadership possible, then how about us? And how about flawed people like us? Allahumma musta'an.
Yeah. What have you said? Tweet number 6 of the thread, 6 of 8. Should I be an academic or an alim? This is a trick question, you write, but some still think it's a choice between one or the other. A friend of mine doing his PhD at Al-Azhar once asked me how I balance between dawah and being a Western academic, given its epistemological restrictions. My response was simple. I don't see academic work as dawah. That will come as a surprise to many, but for me, dawah doesn't fit in a secular realm where Allah and his speech are taken out of the equation by default. Dawah is about the address, the kitab of the Almighty to creation. It takes place in masjid, NGOs, homes of the ulama, and even in cafes. While academia gives you tools to write and indirectly encourage certain ideas or refutes others, true Islamic activity is grounded in the ulum, articulated by its possessors and rooted in Islam's fundamental presuppositions, which are the Quran and the Sunnah, of course. No matter what you do in academia or the private sector, dedicate your life to this tradition and articulate your thoughts as a function of divine speech. So why is academic work not dawah?
Yes, I was just going to clarify that. So when I said that, I was maybe being a bit facetious, or what's a good way of putting it? I wanted to recalibrate the perspective. That's the reason I said it. When I say that academic work isn't da'wah, I mean that, especially if you're in the field of social sciences or in Islamic studies, or let's say so-called proper da'wah or ulum sharia is a part of your research subject. If we start to think that academic work is 100% normal da'wah, so to speak, then we will discount more pure forms of calling to Allah, which is da'wah. What is da'wah, right? Udu ila sabili rabbika. Allah said that call into the path of your Lord, right? To the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if you're having an academic discussion, I guess what I'm saying is there are two things. On the one hand, if you're in an academic sphere, you want to talk about, I don't know, Islamic justice, you can mention that there have been certain people who believed in whatever conception of Islamic justice, but you're putting everything out on the table to be analyzed and potentially accepted or rejected, right? You're not putting forth a thesis, which is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the truth, and this is the path that we need to take. It changes or shifts the locus of authority from Allah to the discussion that's being had. It removes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from the equation. And that doesn't mean that it's against Allah or against the deen or against Islam to engage in academic work. I wouldn't practice it if I believe that. However, what it means is 90%, this is my personal opinion, 90% of our relationship to the ummah should be strengthening the institutions of the ummah, non-state institutions of the ummah. It should be giving speech in masajid and in neutral places that don't require a degree to enter. It means publishing things where you can say, Allah said this, because that's what the fuqaha have been doing for 1400 years. That's what the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, that's what all of the prophets, and forget about the fuqaha, all of the prophets and messengers, the 140,000 who were sent to all the nations of the world, all of them called towards an ya'budullaha ma lakum min ilahin ghayruhu. They had many academic arguments, right? They had many rational arguments, but they started off with worship Allah, you have none worthy of worship but Him. And so I guess my point was, and my point to this brother who's now, mashallah, he's finishing his PhD at Al-Azhar, was that you should consider rebuilding your community based on your relationship with others and their relationship with Allah as your main form of social rectification. Academia will help you in, let's say, publishing something and organizing your thoughts. It'll help you make that point to non-Muslim audiences. That makes sense, right, to a certain extent. But it shouldn't be seen as the one and only thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Number 7, the penultimate. Your words matter. Academics forget that our views have real influence in society. You may be respected for your study of 18th century Ottoman fiqh in Albania, but few will actually read it. Interesting. For the public, government, and even ulama, academia indicates that you know what you're talking about. Whether that deserves another discussion. When you encourage the truth and patience through genuine human connections, you become a role model for others, even your enemies. Make sure you invest in true knowledge and disseminate it to the world. Value Islamic work as you do your academic publications.
I think that's a continuation of the first point to a certain extent. There are many people who, let's say, you have a degree in law. That's wonderful. You can study comparative, let's say, Western and Islamic law. You can talk about the intricacies of Islamic law from a historical perspective. That's all wonderful and it's great work. And, I ask that Allah reward you for that. However, in terms of turning that knowledge of the law into action and to say, okay, what should we be doing as a Muslim society? What should we be doing outside of our state institutions? How can we change existing oppressive or colonial institutions to bring them under the justice of Islam and under the Tawheed of Allah? Then we need to think systematically about the audience we're writing for. In other words, what I call Islamic knowledge production. Right? Islamic knowledge production means that you're speaking to an audience that is responsible to Allah, or that will be held responsible by Allah, where the Quran, the revelation, right, of your Creator, is an authoritative source. And the point is, by investing significant intellectual capital outside of secular academia, just like how you create a reverse brain drain, right, brain drain from, let's say, the West to the Muslim world, you create an intellectual brain or an intellectual migration towards ways, forms of thinking and sciences that are fundamentally, within the assumptions of Islam. Or to summarize, you're essentially, you are strengthening non-state, non-secular academic, you are strengthening Muslim and Islamic forms of thinking and activity by being engaged in that as a Muslim academic.
Okay. And your last tweet, indeed, actions are by intentions, which is a quote from a Bukhari hadith, of course. A sincere scholar values deep study, mastering languages, publishing long-form work, e.g. books and lecture series, and cultivating long-term relationships that transform worldviews and action. Social media fame and flashy appearances fade quickly, and lack of substance won't let you solve the world's problems. As the Ummah's thinkers, remember that thought is only valuable with action, and your actionable knowledge will be essential to complementing your worldview. A call to action there.
Brother Paul, this is something that I personally struggled with for many years, and I still do. Because when you write an academic paper or you write a book on, one of the ulum or something, you give a 1 hour long conference presentation, the number of people who will consume that knowledge, is very little. Yeah. It'll be 10 people, 20 people. If you're a top academic, I don't know, 1,000 people. Whereas the second you make a controversial tweet, as people know, or if people who follow me know, the second you do it, immediately 100,000, 200,000, people see it and retweet it and criticize you or praise you. And it's very easy to get sucked in to writing opinion articles, to appearing on television. I've gotten lots of invitations from TV channels and tried my best to reject most of them. Not because I don't believe they're doing the right thing, not because I'm not interested in communicating to a wider audience, but I think that academic work, the in-depth nature and the nuance and the respect of academia in the sense that, look, it's not just a title, but you actually know what you're doing, or you're able to think about things systematically. That fundamental reality of academic work, of ilmi work, this is like ilm al-hadith is in my view the highest form of academic scholarship. If you're doing that kind of work and then engaged with this clickbait and stuff like that, then it reduces your impact in the long term. you're not able to create a new generation of people. You're just focusing on, people's thoughts and emotions in the short term. And that's one of the things that I really appreciate, Brother Paul, about your podcast. I never got to tell you this, by the way. So I'll tell you, on air. But one of the things I appreciate about your work is you care about the nuance and uplifting your audience towards, discussing these academic, the nuances, the problems, the questions, thinking critically, and not just going based on people's, thoughts and short-term feelings and emotions.
Mm-hmm. Oh, thank you.
That's very healthy for everyone.
Yeah, thank you. That's very kind of you. Well, those are the 8 tweets. I must say, a lot of food for thought there. Actually, how to be an academic while Muslim. But you yourself, to return the compliment, are a role model of sorts. You are a successful young scholar, now an assistant professor at a prestigious university in Turkey. And you are pretty fearless in your tweets, obviously, and I think that's a really healthy thing. Not all scholars, not all scholars are. I'm not going to mention names, but we all know who they are. Some very eminent scholars simply don't speak out at all about anything, really. I mean, well, they might speak out about self-discipline or about fasting, which is all very good, but they won't speak about Palestine. They won't speak about the Ummah. They won't speak about unifying the Ummah and all these kind of slightly edgy subjects, and but you do. So credit to you, and you yourself, I think, are a role model, as I say, for that. And it's great.
Don't forgive us for our shortcomings. It's not enough, but inshallah we can improve in the future. Jazakallahu khairan.
So thank you. Well, we'll leave it there. Unless you have any final words, I think there's a lot to think about there, and I think thank you very much for really opening up these topics, really, particularly for aspiring scholars, aspiring academics, those doing their doctorates, masters, who want an academic career, the kind of challenges and issues that they will inevitably face in this world. So thank you for sharing that. Do you have any final comments?
Thank you so much, Brother Paul, for creating the space for us to discuss these issues, because I think they get swept under the rug, they get bottled up in terms of emotions. And this is a discussion we need to be having, especially with the increasing number of Muslims in academia. Jazakallahu khairan.
Yeah, perfect. Great stuff. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Jaan Islam, and we'll see you again, inshallah, one day soon. So take care. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.